needs that sort of mindset. And a lot of that cannot happen in a classroom setting where one individual is doing all of the work, everybody else is passive, and then thinking that that's going to result in mature believers. So, I think that model, we don't need to do away with what we have, but if we're going to take discipleship seriously, we need to expand it and make sure that just as that plumber, he's got confidence. He knows how to fix the sink the same way that when I'm with my family and I've been told I need to leave my kids in worship, I can do that in my home. Somebody has showed me, they've watched me, they've helped me, and I now feel the freedom to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tonight, actually, I got a group of guys together, and I may ask you to join too, but I got a group of guys together. Now, I have a subscription to Ligonier Connect, and it's funny you talked about classroom setting. I don't do well in a classroom setting, and I'm not saying I'm dumb and stupid, but I'm more of a hands-on guy. But when it comes to theology or when it comes to biblical living, I'm both a classroom guy and I'm also hands-on. And the reason why I say that is because if I don't learn, okay, for example, the Bible study I picked for myself and a bunch of my friends to do was a teaching series by R.C. Sproul called Justification by Faith Alone. Okay. If I don't know what justification by faith alone is, I can't put that into practice or teach it to other people. So sometimes I got to go back to that classroom setting to learn and try to retain what I learned. So then I could turn around with biblical background, if you will, and teach that to, the guys that I called to join into this group with me. That's like discipleship times discipleship. One teach another, and so forth and so on. Yeah. Some would call it a pyramid scheme, but it's not a scheme.
It's more, it's the old apprenticeship model. And there are 4 stages of effective learning. You need directing, you need someone to teach, but you need showing as well. This is where YouTube is so helpful, when you can see somebody. That's more than just reading a book. It's hard to read a book for, building a backyard deck. It's a lot easier to watch somebody on YouTube. But ideally, that's not it as well. There's a 3rd stage, which is where someone says, okay, now you've seen me do it. You do it, and I'm going to observe you. And then that finally leads to the 4th stage, where you actually delegate and say, okay, now you're going to go do it on your own. Unless those 4 areas, that includes teaching. That number 1 is teaching. And like you said, sometimes you have to circle back. But if all you're doing, and this is what a lot of evangelical churches do, if basically all you're doing is a large group lecture style teaching, don't be surprised when a lot of people struggle to translate that wonderful sermon on prayer to actually doing prayer on their own with their family, with a friend in a small group. You got to balance out. You got to have a greater dynamic that doesn't undermine the teaching but adds to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I prepared my my first real sermon, I followed the model called sticky sermon. You ever heard of it? It's okay. It's a model called a sticky sermon, and each thing has an acronym. It's an acronym that means certain things or whatever. But the goal is if I preach and you don't remember 90% of what I said, you got to remember the sticky bullet point that I preach on for you to go back and actually do that and carry it forward to the next person. And that's another level of competency. Me personally, I cannot sit under preaching where there is flavor, if you will, in the preaching, where the preacher, hoops and hollers and gets up in there. Now, if they're getting into it and they're hooping and hollering and it's reformed and I can understand it, different story, right. Maybe we'll reevaluate. But when I attend a church, Matt Chandler, you ever heard of Matt Chandler?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Matt Chandler is this great preacher, very into it, active, and knows how to get it. But then you got somebody like John MacArthur, who is, I'm not going to say boring because I like his content, but he's more mellow, if you will. Yeah. John Piper is mellow sometimes, but when he's really into it, he can get all like googly eyed and like get into the sermon. But I cannot sit under a preacher that hoops and hollers. Now, is my competency level low because of that? No. That's just another way of me to say, okay, look, I'm not learning anything by this, because your actions up there don't transfer to your actions out in the real world, because what's up here is a show and what's over here is who knows, so we're getting off topic. However, so what are the benefits of competency?
One of them is really motivation. And I don't mean, to have, if you think of just a ball, something that's rolling forward, there's got to be some impetus from behind that gets it moving. There also has to be no barriers in the way. And competence, it doesn't provide the force from behind, but it does remove the barriers that restrict movement. And so in that sense, there's freedom. And this is where, think of someone who really becomes a competent, let's just say a golfer or shooting free throws in basketball. The more you practice, the less you have to think about it. You don't have to sit there and go through the motions. It becomes second nature. And somebody who's done, for example, Bible study for a long time or done one-to-one discipleship for a long time, it begins to be easier for them. They don't have to think, okay, I should cross-reference this. I should look up this word. I should, they've got kind of the basic knack, so to speak, of it. And it's a whole lot easier. There's not that emotional burden because they know what they're doing. And what we want to see is that doesn't mean to achieve competence does not mean that guys will actually do stuff, but it'll make it easier for them to do it. And for me, the goal of discipleship, I can't make any guy do anything, but I can set him up to where he's now responsible. I've transferred to him all that I can. And then if he doesn't take that next step, well, that's on him. It's not on me. And so, it can be the same thing about, evangelism, helping people understand, okay, this is what it means to share the gospel. Here's some ways of doing it. Now you've got something to work with. And so it's up to you then to take that next step, but you're not on your own thinking, I don't even know what it means to share the gospel. I don't even know what the gospel is, So that freedom, it's an aspect of freedom that you begin to feel when you feel that basic competence.
Right. Now, for the second part of that question, all right, so why should men care about whether or not they are competent in the core areas of Christianity?
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking, this book is written for guys who are hungry to grow. I'm not trying to convince guys to grow. I am writing to men who they can see, I wish, there's a horizon. I'm not saying I'm going to reach the horizon, but I wish I was making forward progress there. And again, I would just say to those guys, you will find yourself more willing to do the things you're being asked to do, whether it's be a spiritual leader in the home. Again, if you begin to feel like, okay, I think I have an understanding of what it means to be a Christian dad or a Christian husband. And I think I know even how to discipline my kids in a way that resonates with the truths of the gospel and affirms these truths. As you begin to have that understanding, and if you've seen someone model it for you, and you've gotten some feedback to where you've asked them questions like, I don't know what to do with my 8-year-old. He's rebelling, doesn't want to listen. As you begin to get some of that wisdom passed on to you, again, it doesn't mean you're going to do it right every time, but you're in a much better place to be able to do it right than if you've never taken the time to even think about how you should raise your kids or how you should relate to your spouse or how you should witness to your neighbor. So these are the things that will free you up in your Christian life to pursue discipleship. That's why you should care.
Oh yeah, that's a good explanation. I would even add another reason you should care is, and obviously we're talking about men that are looking to grow. If you are that spiritual rock for a friend of yours and they call you for biblical advice, you need to be competent in that. You need to know at least like you said earlier, Joe, the basics of Christianity. For me, I would consider a basic praying. Now, sometimes men don't know what to say. I hear it all the time. I don't know what to say. Like, what do I say? Just open your mouth and pray. Let your heart do the talking. It doesn't matter. There is no such thing as a perfect prayer. The only perfect prayer we have is in Matthew when Jesus said, pray like this. But when we're having a conversation with us and the Father, just lay it out on the table. What's that verse that says it's Philippians 4:6, where it says, let your requests be known to God.
Yeah.
just open your mouth and just whatever comes out, comes out. It is what it is. But be competent in that and be that rock for the friend that needs someone to lean on in that, in that time of their lives. So, and then, competence for Christian fellowship, this is part of the next question. It's two questions ahead. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm sorry. All right. You mentioned 5 areas where guys need competence. All right. The first 2 are word and prayer, which we just talked about. All right. And then we talk about a kind of training is needed for men to cultivate a deeper spiritual life. All right. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about training that can cultivate a deeper spiritual life.
Okay. So, in this chapter, I'm not wanting guys to have to fill in blanks. I want to be very clear. And so rather than just say, hey, look, you should be competent, and think, okay, well, what areas? It's like, okay, well, here are some maybe not exhaustive areas, but here's some critical areas. So the first 2, which are about this deepening spiritual life, is word and prayer. And, let's just be honest. And guys don't need to be ashamed of this, but we're not trained in like elementary school or high school or even college on how to handle God's word. It's not like reading just any book. I mean, what other book do you know that somebody has said, look, meditate and memorize this? And even when we say that, it's like, in my own opinion, there's nothing more transformative than meditating on God's word. And honestly, memorization as a means to that. Now, if I say that to your typical guy, he doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about. Right? Is it like, I've heard of meditation? Isn't that a Buddhist thing? What am I supposed to be doing with this? I mean, memorize? I mean, that sounds childish. I've not memorized anything since I was like in first grade, So we can't expect, as disciplers or Christian leaders, we can't expect people to know how to just follow a reading plan. I mean, let's strip it down and start and recognize, okay, most people, they pick up the Bible. It's like a foreign culture. They don't know what to do with it. And so, whether it's reading the Bible and being able to understand it, that's one skill. Again, meditating on it, that's another. And so you've got all of the word side, but then there's also the prayer side. And so if we're breathing in God's word, we're exhaling, we're speaking to God. And that too is something that we'd like to think is just all instinctual. It's not. Aspects are, the new Christian can pray, but things like confession, things like adoration,
right,
are areas of prayer that you can be a Christian for decades and no one says, okay, there's a kind of prayer where you don't even ask God for anything. You just acknowledge who he is. And as you just acknowledge his identity and character, you find that your own heart is transformed because you see more of him. Now, most men don't know how to engage in that kind of prayer. And it's because no one's, again, sat them down and said, hey, look, let's do this together. Let's just spend 30 minutes. And let's before we get to the wants, before we get to the requests, let's just worship God for who he is. Now, that requires a degree of knowledge of God, the attributes of God, the character of God. And so it's not, again, there's ways that you can set guys up to be able to do this, but most guys haven't been trained in that way.
You're right. And I'm sitting here thinking, most of my theological training does come from Reformed people. Obviously the church that I go to, my pastor actually being the number one source of where my information comes from. And then I follow R.C. Sproul, John MacArthur, who isn't Reformed, but, people like John Piper and Matt Chandler and sometimes Francis Chan, or Robert Goffrey. Like, I'm looking at all these people that are like-minded, if you will, in theology. So in a sense, I may not know these people personally, but I'm not walking along, if you will, because they are kind of teaching me. Okay. And then it's more tangible because I have my pastor that I can call, text, email, FaceTime, well, not FaceTime, but, call, Google Duo at any given time, or Zoom meeting at any given time if I need spiritual guidance on something, or if I need a competency check, a competence check, I can call him and get that. But cultivating a deeper spiritual life is so important because when you know the name of God, or which name to call on, like Elohim, the creator God, when you know that and you start praying to the Creator God, then your spiritual fellowship deepens.